When a Mongol army breached the walls of a city, the killing was not the end. It was only the beginning. Surviving women were seized in full view of their neighbors, bound together with rawhide strips that cut into the skin. Some were marked with charcoal symbols to show who had claimed them, others forced to walk barefoot over the smoldering remains of their own homes. But the details of what would happen to them next are far worse than you can imagine, and they were repeated in city after city. Picture this. You stand in the middle of what used to be your home. Smoke rises in thin columns from broken rooftops, blurring the pale light of morning. The air is thick with the smell of burning grain, scorched wood, and the metallic scent of blood. Shattered pottery litters the street beneath your feet, and a toppled cart blocks the way ahead. Somewhere nearby, a child is crying, the sound muffled by the weight of silence that has settled over the city. They are here. The stories you once thought were exaggerated have taken shape in the form of mounted warriors, their fur-lined armor darkened by travel and battle. They move with unnerving precision, each action purposeful, every glance calculated. There's no drunken shouting, no wild chaos. The men who now control your city are not looters in search of quick plunder. They are conquerors with a plan. For years, travelers spoke in hushed voices about the Mongols. They told of armies that could appear from nowhere, of cities that fell in days, of entire populations erased from the earth. The tales sounded impossible, yet even the most distant kingdoms spoke the name with a quiet dread. Now, standing in the ruins, you realize the truth is worse than the warnings. What those warnings never told you was how methodical the cruelty would be, or how it would break the survivors long before their bodies gave out. The Mongols had perfected the art of conquest. Their speed on the battlefield was matched only by the swiftness with which they imposed their will on the defeated. For women in a captured city, survival was never a matter of luck. It was part of a process, carried out step by step, the same way they prepared their bows or saddled their horses. This was cruelty with a purpose. It was not simply the impulse of victory. It was a weapon as sharp as any blade, intended to send a message far beyond the city walls. That message would echo across plains and deserts, reaching the ears of rulers and commoners alike. Resist, and you will be destroyed in body, spirit, and memory. The Mongols did not need to take every city by force. Many opened their gates the moment their banners appeared on the horizon. Those who refused would endure what you are about to witness. And as the mounted soldiers dismount and spread through the streets, the first stage of your city's fate begins. To understand what is about to unfold, you must know the people who have taken your city. The Mongols were not born an empire. They began as scattered tribes roaming the vast grasslands of the Central Asian steppe. These tribes often fought each other over grazing land, horses, and herds, bound loosely by clan loyalties and seasonal migrations. Life on the steppe was harsh, demanding constant movement and unyielding resilience. Only those who mastered riding and archery from childhood could hope to survive. In the late 12th century, a man named Temujin began uniting these rival tribes. He offered loyalty to those who followed him and destruction to those who resisted. By combining personal charisma with an unflinching sense of discipline, he transformed a fractured region into a single force. When he took the title of Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler, the foundations of the most fearsome military power in history were set. The Mongol army was unlike anything the settled civilizations had faced. Every soldier was a skilled rider and archer, trained to shoot accurately while moving at full speed. They could travel more than 100 kilometers in a day, striking deep into enemy territory before defenders could organize. Their supply lines depended not on wagons or storehouses, but on the herds that traveled with them, allowing them to sustain campaigns over immense distances. But speed and endurance were only part of their strength. The Mongols understood the power of fear. When they encountered resistance, they made examples so terrible that the next city would surrender without a single arrow fired. This was not reckless brutality. It was a carefully designed strategy, ensuring their conquests moved swiftly and efficiently. The treatment of captives, especially women, was central to this method. Word of what happened after a Mongol victory traveled faster than their horses. Survivors from conquered cities often carried the message themselves, sent away intentionally so that their stories would poison the will to resist in the next place. In the early years of expansion, this approach was tested against powerful enemies. In the Khwarezm Empire, defiance led to the destruction of entire urban centers. The few who were spared were left with memories designed to haunt them for the rest of their lives. Across the Russian principalities, fortified towns were dismantled with precision, their populations reduced to ashes or chains. Your city has now joined that long list. What you are about to witness will follow a pattern repeated countless times across Asia and Eastern Europe. It will unfold in stages, each one more deliberate than the last. The Mongols do not simply win battles. They dismantle societies, leaving nothing that can rise again. The soldiers now move in coordinated lines, their eyes scanning doorways and alleyways. Some carry torches, others carry ropes. The first stage is not killing, it is separation. That is when you realize that for the women of this city, the ordeal has only begun. And what awaited them in the hours and days ahead would leave scars that no one would ever see, but that would never fade. The first stage after the walls have fallen is not immediate slaughter. It is control. The Mongols understood that victory on the battlefield was only half the conquest. The rest was won in the minds of the defeated. That is why the first moments after their soldiers entered a city were carefully orchestrated to shatter the will of any survivors. They began with the symbols of your life. Flags bearing the colors of your rulers were torn down and replaced with the simple, stark banners of the Mongol army. Public buildings were taken first: the palace, the marketplace, the temple, all secured in minutes by riders who seemed to know exactly where to go. Those who resisted in these final moments were cut down without hesitation, their bodies left where they fell. Then came the sound, not the chaos of drunken looters, but a strange rhythm. Mongol commanders often signaled their troops with horns or drums, and here the sounds were used for a new purpose: to let every surviving citizen know that the city was no longer theirs. The noise echoed through the streets, rising and falling in deliberate patterns, as if to remind you with every beat that resistance was over. In these early hours, the Mongols also made sure to display their captives. Wounded defenders were paraded through the main thoroughfares, their armor stripped away, their heads bowed. This was not to honor their bravery, but to show that even the strongest among you were powerless now. Any remaining armed men were hunted down methodically, leaving only the unarmed and the helpless. The fear was not confined to the present moment. The Mongols wanted it to take root, to spread through the survivors like a sickness. That is why they allowed some people to flee. Messengers would carry tales of the conquest to nearby towns, stories filled with detail about what had been done and what was still to come. The Mongols counted on these witnesses as much as they did their own soldiers. By the time the soldiers had finished this first stage, the city no longer felt like a place you knew. The walls, the streets, even the air seemed to belong to someone else. And then, with a psychological blow delivered, the Mongols began preparing for the next phase, the division of the population. Once the city was fully under their control, the Mongols moved to the next step in their method. They divided the population. This was not done in a hurried or chaotic fashion. It was deliberate, as if following a plan rehearsed countless times before. The The soldiers drove people from their homes into open squares or along the main streets, shouting commands in a language most could not understand. The point was not communication. The point was to herd the conquered like livestock. Men of fighting age were separated first. Any who showed signs of injury from the battle were dispatched quickly, often in front of the crowd. The healthy were bound together, sometimes in groups of 10 or 20, and taken to a separate location. The Mongols knew these men could never be trusted as slaves or servants. They were seen as potential threats, and threats were removed entirely. Those who did not meet their fate immediately were often worked to exhaustion for a short time before execution, a final use before disposal. Older men, boys too young to fight, and male elders faced mixed fates. Some were killed outright, especially if resources were scarce or if the city had resisted fiercely. Others might be spared for labor, but always under the watch of armed guards. The women were sorted next. This stage was perhaps the most unsettling in its cold efficiency. Women were inspected quickly by mounted officers who looked for signs of youth, health, and usefulness. The most physically able were taken aside for immediate transport with the army. Others were set aside for servitude within the conquered territory. Mothers with young children might be kept together, but only if the Mongols believed the children could be of value later. This sorting process stripped away the last fragments of normal life. Families were broken apart with a single gesture from a soldier. Protests were silenced by the edge of a blade or the draw of a bowstring. In a matter of hours, the entire social fabric of the city was torn apart. When the sorting was complete, the Mongols had remade the population into something they could control, a scattering of captives without the protection of family or community. And as the chosen women were gathered for their forced journey, the next stage of the conquest began. Once the Mongols had divided the people, they began moving their captives out of the city. This was not done in secrecy. The forced march was a display of power meant to be remembered by everyone who saw it. The chosen women, along with a smaller group of young boys and skilled artisans, were placed at the center of the column. Around them, mounted soldiers rode slowly, their presence a constant reminder that there was no escape. The march often began before the fires in the city had even gone out. Behind them, the air was still thick with the smell of destruction. Ahead, the path led out into open country, where there would be no shelter and no place to hide. The Mongols made sure the captives passed through neighboring villages or along well-traveled roads, so word of the conquest would spread even faster. Every step was part of a larger strategy, to make the fate of one city a warning to the next. Those too weak to keep pace were left behind. Their lives ended quickly and without ceremony. The survivors learned fast that slowing down was not an option. The guards kept the pace steady, using the march itself as another form of control. With each mile, the captives were further removed from the place they had once called home, their ties to the past cut as surely as if by a blade. This was more than transportation. It was a living announcement of Mongol dominance. The sight of an entire column of captives guarded by disciplined riders could convince a watching settlement that resistance was hopeless. It was a message that needed no translator. Before we go further into the most disturbing part of what happened next, subscribe and hit that like button if you can handle what is still to come, and comment below to tell me where you are watching from. It is incredible to think that people all around the world share the same curiosity about the darkest parts of human history. As the column continued, the captives began to understand that the journey itself was reshaping their fate. The next stage would decide where each of them would end up and whether they would ever see another familiar face again. For many, that decision would seal their fate in ways that still chill historians to this day. When the forced march ended, the captives were brought to a temporary camp or a secured settlement under Mongol control. Here, The next stage began, the allocation. This was the moment when the Mongols decided the long-term fate of each captive. For the women, this was rarely left to chance. Senior commanders oversaw the process, often accompanied by their personal guards. Women considered young, healthy, and physically unscarred were taken first. Some were claimed by the highest-ranking officers as concubines or attendants. Others were set aside for distribution among the soldiers as rewards for service. The Mongol leadership understood that keeping their warriors loyal meant more than gold or horses. The promise of human spoils was a powerful incentive. Not all captives were kept close to the army. Many women were sent into the vast network of territories already under Mongol rule. Skilled women, those who could weave, prepare fine foods, or perform specialized tasks, might be placed in noble households or used to support military encampments. Others were sent far from their homelands, scattered across the empire, so they could never return or regroup with survivors. Even among those spared immediate harm, freedom was gone. Every action was watched, every movement controlled. Speaking the wrong language in the wrong moment, refusing an order, or attempting to escape could mean instant death. The Mongols were known for acting without hesitation, and their punishments were designed to be swift and public. For some women, allocation was the start of a life in bondage that might last decades. They could be passed from one master to another, traded like livestock, or given as gifts to secure alliances. Their identities were stripped away, replaced with whatever role their captors required. The system was not random cruelty. It was a way to turn conquest into a source of ongoing wealth and labor. By integrating captives into their own ranks and territories, the Mongols ensured that the spoils of war continued to serve them long after the battle had ended. For those who had survived the siege, the march, and the allocation, there was still one final stage to endure: the complete erasure of the city and the people they had once been. Once the captives had been removed or assigned, the Mongols turned their attention back to the city itself. This final stage was designed to make sure nothing of it remained. Not its defenses, not its name, not even the memory of its people. Erasure was as much a part of the conquest as the battle that had preceded it. The process began with the destruction of key structures. Fortifications were torn down so they could never be used again. City gates were dismantled or burned, and defensive towers reduced to rubble. If the Mongols had needed to breach walls during the siege, they often made sure the damage was expanded afterward, leaving nothing intact that might allow the settlement to be rebuilt quickly. Temples, shrines, and other sacred places were stripped of valuables, then either desecrated or demolished. This was not only an act of looting, but also a blow against the spiritual identity of the people. The Mongols knew that breaking a city's faith was another way to ensure it would never rise again. The marketplaces and storage areas, the heart of a city's survival, were destroyed as well. Grain stores were burned or given to Mongol herds. Water sources were fouled or blocked. Without food or clean water, any stragglers left behind would not be able to endure. In some cases, the Mongols changed the physical landscape itself. They diverted rivers, collapsed irrigation systems, or dismantled bridges, making the location nearly impossible to inhabit in the future. If the city was along a major trade route, they might even build new settlements nearby under Mongol control, redirecting commerce away from the ruins. What remained was a shell. The streets where people had once traded, celebrated, and lived their entire lives became silent. Nature would reclaim the land over time, but the culture and community that had existed there were gone. The survivors scattered across the empire would carry memories of the city, but those memories would be all that remained. For the Mongols, this was not an act of rage, it was strategy. A city erased from the map could never rebel, could never inspire others to fight back. It was a warning carved into the earth itself, one that would be remembered for generations. The destruction of a city was never the end of the Mongol campaign. In many ways, it was the beginning of something larger. Each erased settlement became part of a growing legend, one that traveled faster than any army and reached farther than the Mongols themselves could ride in a season. The fear of what had happened was as valuable to them as the horses they rode or the weapons they carried. In the years of expansion under Genghis Khan and his successors, this reputation became a tool as sharp as any sword. News of a single city's fate could convince an entire kingdom to surrender without a battle. The Mongols used survivors as living messengers, ensuring their stories contained the most terrifying details. These accounts were often exaggerated by the listeners, but that only made them more effective. Rulers who considered resisting weighed the cost carefully. They knew that victory against the Mongols was rare, and defeat meant not just personal death, but the loss of their people, their culture, and their place in history. Many chose to avoid that risk entirely, opening their gates and offering tribute in hopes of mercy. Even when the Mongols accepted submission, they made sure it was on their own terms. For the women taken during these conquests, their fate became part of the empire's living structure. Some were absorbed into Mongol households, bearing children who would grow up knowing only the steppe as their homeland. Others were traded across vast distances, disappearing into territories thousands of miles from where they had been born. The scattering of these captives helped dissolve the cultural bonds of the conquered cities, making it even harder for them to recover. The Mongols did not need to destroy every settlement. The fear that spread in their wake meant they could conquer faster, with fewer battles, conserving their strength for the greatest prizes. Entire regions fell without resistance simply because their leaders wanted to avoid the fate they had heard described so vividly. This is how the Mongol Empire, in less than a century, grew to span from the shores of the Pacific to the edges of Eastern Europe. It was not only speed, discipline, or military skill that made them unstoppable. It was the promise that if you resisted, your world would be erased. And for many, that was enough to surrender before the first arrow flew. The fires in your city have long since burned out, leaving only the charred remains of what once stood. The streets are silent now, not because life has returned to normal, but because there is no one left to walk them. The few who survived are scattered far away, their voices joining the chorus of stories that will spread to the next city and the next after that. The Mongols have moved on, their banners disappearing over the horizon, already seeking the next place to bring under their control. For you, there is no going back. The home you knew exists only in memory. Its walls, its people, and its name have been taken from the world as if they had never been. This was the true power of the Mongol method, not just to win battles, but to remove entire cities from history itself. It was a strategy so effective that it allowed them to build the largest contiguous land empire the world has ever seen. And yet, even after the city was gone and the people scattered, the memory of what was done to them would outlive the empire itself. If this glimpse into history's hidden darkness has left you wanting to uncover more buried truths, I have prepared another journey into the shadows of the past that you will not want to miss. Click on the video appearing on your screen now to discover another shocking chapter that history tried to erase. And if you found this exploration as compelling as I did, hit that subscribe button so we can continue peeling back the layers of history together. These forgotten voices deserve to be heard, and there are so many more stories waiting to be told, because history is not just what is remembered, it is also what was taken away. And sometimes, the most important stories are the ones that nearly vanished forever.